Hey everyone, it's VHS Massacre Radio. I'm your host, Tom Seymour. So we actually have some pretty great news. James Rolfe, known as the Angry Video Game Nerd, actually joined the cast of VHS Massacre 2, which is really exciting. In 2006-2007, I was working for Black 20, which was a startup that was eventually sold to Fox. James Rolfe came on the scene about that time, maybe slightly earlier. In some way, we were part of this wave of internet video, although video on the internet had existed for a very, very long time. Places like YouTube allowed you to upload videos with, much better resolution and longer lengths that had been previously, allowed. And also they would host it too, so you wouldn't have to, have the video files on your website. So, it was a pretty big deal when it first started. And at Black 20, we even got a couple Emmy nominations, which was pretty exciting. But James Rolfe was shot to sort of fame, and to this day remains one of the biggest presence on the internet. The views on his videos are in the billions. We're not talking millions, we're talking billions. On YouTube alone, it's something like 1.6 billion. The thing is, though, he started off as a filmmaker, so I got to talk with him about some of his favorite movies, from King Kong to Night of the Living Dead, one of my personal favorites. And he's also talking about new projects he's working on as well, some of the obstacles he's had, and his affection for the video store era, which will tie nicely into VHS Massacre 2. Beyond that, more news for VHS Massacre 2. I'm probably going to try to grab just a few more interviews, possibly Gorman Bashard, who he's been doing documentaries for a while, pretty important documentaries. I recently watched, I believe the name is A Dog Named Gucci. It's about how to protect against animal abuse. It was the story of this dog. But he had started out doing these movies for Charlie Band and Full Moon Entertainment, along with one of my other friends, Carmen Capobianco. And so he's going to be really interesting to talk to, and I'm trying to get permission to interview this entertainment lawyer just to talk about, breaking up some of these large conglomerate companies. In regard to media, there's only, 4 or 5 media companies, and it becomes a problem, let's say with Disney, if you don't align with their ideology, like you want to make trashy B-movies like Troma, and Disney wants to have nothing to do with that, but they own most of the market. You're in this sort of wasteland of trying to release independently, which is incredibly difficult. When just a few people have control over the media, it's a serious problem. But what I want to know from a lawyer is it sort of delusional to break up these media companies? What would it do to the economy? Is it like a sort of leftist child's dream that makes no sense to break up these companies? I just want to know from someone who's an expert in the subject. I want to do one last visit to Troma, and then I should have enough to finish off the documentary. So it should be pretty cool. Anyway, without further ado, here is the James Rolfe interview.
As a kid, I always loved fantasy, monster, and horror films. It was all the same to me. I just loved every type of it, every genre, every decade. I started out watching all the black and white classics, and then I moved my way up to the modern slasher films. So I kind of had the opportunity to experience the history of horror in chronological order, pretty much, because I was too young at the time to watch the R-rated ones. So I kind of gradually worked my way up. So that was kind of like a growing process. The film that changed my life was King Kong, the original 1933 version. It just showed you the full capabilities of what a movie can do. I mean, King Kong really utilized the cinematic medium. It was one of the early talking movies, so it was one of the first films to have a full musical score, a score that specifically followed the action on screen. And the first film where it had sound effects, where they would have to they have to figure out how to make a dinosaur roar. Like, what would that sound like? So they would do things like they'd record a lion roar and play it backwards and do stuff like that. I mean, and a lot of vocal effects and a lot of Foley and stuff. And then, of course, on the visual side of it, they had the stop motion dinosaurs and Kong, of course. First film where the main character was a special effect, or one of the first, for sure. It had rear screen projection, had all these front screen projection techniques. They used like compositing. They just basically experimented and used every trick in the book to make all that possible. So that was really a pioneering film. But even for me, seeing it as a kid in the 80s, on TV, it blew my mind. And after that, I was making movies with puppets and action figures, using fishing line to move things around. So I grew up watching more horror films, and my favorites are always going to be the Universal classics: Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, The Mummy, and so on. I love the black and white look, especially the look you have in the 40s that they did, because in the 40s you had these really great, really polished shots where you'd see the full moons and the castles and the dead leaves blowing through the air. The opening cemetery sequence in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is prime example of classic horror cinematography at its best. But then you also have the lower budget black and white, because you could also get a really good look with a really low budget gritty cinematography, like in Night of the Living Dead. I think Night of the Living Dead, which was made a lot later when color was more prominent, but Night of the Living Dead was sort of like the independent film. This was the low budget version, black and white, but also modern at the same time. So that's what always inspired me to kind of try and get the best out of both worlds. So I would, the last horror film that I've made so far, it was a short, it's called The Deader the Better, and that's the last film that I made that has nothing to do with video games. So that film was sort of an attempt to make a combination of black and white horror and modern splatter flicks. So I made the decision that it would be in black and white, like Night of the Living Dead, except the blood would be in color. So every time they bleed, that's red. It would make the blood stand out more. So that was a decision. That was a decision just out of love of two separate genres in horror. And right about that time, right after that, was when YouTube came out, and that's when I first started showing the Angry Video Game Nerd episodes. I had two pilots that were kind of rough, but the third one was the one that solidified the character. That was the review I did with the Karate Kid. Now, the Angry Video Game Nerd is a character that just rants about old video games that which I thought had no relevance anymore, and that was the joke. It was like, hey, this guy's still pissed off about all these old games. Now, it was a character, but it was based on truth about games that I used to play as a kid. So I'd have that memory in my head, and I decided to make, dramatize it into a cinematic fashion. So the Angry Video Game Nerd was kind of a deviation from what I was originally planning to do, make films, but I found a happy marriage in the two. I got to make a movie based on the Angry Video Game Nerd that dabbles in science fiction and monsters and, treasure hunt, the whole genre, everything that I love put into one. Now, it was a long road to get to that point because it didn't just come out of nowhere. I'd been making movies since I was a kid, so it was literally decades of practice before any of this happened, and all that practice was long before YouTube, so maybe that was a good thing that I didn't get to show all my old crappy movies, but I post old stuff sometimes. When YouTube came out, I was just in the right place at the right time, so by that point, and posting the nerd episodes, that was when it took off. So that's where the journey progressed. It was all because of the fans. The fans helped me get to where I am. So even though the nerd was what got popular, but that helped bring in traffic to my other stuff, and to be to get to make movies. I mean, that was the main goal. So it was really like a community effort. The fans are what made the nerd movie possible. Literally, because it's a fundraiser. They funded it. So all that money went into the movie. So yeah, it was a really long journey, and and there's no clear path. There's no like real solid outline of like how to get there. Like, oh, I want to be a movie director. Well, you don't just become a movie director. It's a lot more complicated. So like you got to have some kind of job. You got to make a living. And I make a living by complaining about video games. So I can't complain about that. That's the job itself. I complain about the games. So that's fun. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. You get to play video games and drink beer and curse and get mad at them and vent to the world. So it's fun. It's a fun thing. But I always have to be working on my big project behind that. So I am working on another horror film now, early stages. It's honestly going to be years. It's probably going to be a long time. That's what I learned. These things take a long time if you're going to try to make a feature film on your spare time, And even if you get paid for the feature film eventually, it's like you have to put in all these hours first. Like it's the only reason you're going to do it is because you enjoy doing it. You're not going to do it to make a living, because the amount of hours you can put into making a feature film is the same amount of hours. Like if you were to take those same hours and put it into a regular job, minimum wage, you would have made a ton more at that point, because otherwise you're doing all this for free in a hope that for all the time you put into it, that eventually you'll get paid back for that time in the long run. But you're just holding your breath for years until that would ever come. So you could totally go in debt for making a film, even if the film is fundraised, because that has nothing to do with it. The fundraiser, all the money goes into the film. So anything that you're actually going to personally make out of it would only happen after the film is finished, and then where you could actually exhibit it and sell it on DVD or whatever. Well, DVDs, I guess, aren't really big thing. Even Blu-rays, it seems. Yeah, I don't know. That's a whole topic. No matter how far the technology goes with physical media, because now they have Ultra HD 4K discs, but it seems like everything's going to streaming now. It's more about that instant access. I mean, even for me, I have a whole entire room full of VHS tapes and stuff, and it fills up, and it's like, I'm not going to be watching stuff on VHS, but I like to own it for like collectors, because I'm nostalgic for that. And I like to have that in my background of my videos to show as, hey, this is a period in time that I don't want to forget. I like to, show that this is like almost like a period in history which I was a part of, and it's fun to look back at that. And there's a lot of fanfare, as you know for sure, about VHS. People get VHS tattoos and all that. But yeah, a lot of times it's a lot more convenient to get that quick access, to get it streaming and get it right on your TV as quickly as possible without having to open up the packaging and get that disc out and and then wait through all the FBI warnings and logos and trailers and commercials, and it's just a pain. I like when the movie just starts right up. So I will rent a movie for $4 as opposed to getting out the DVD. And it looks better anyway. It's usually, in HD.
Okay, so that was James. It was awesome. Very cool. Very happy to have that interview. So, James, if you're listening to this, I appreciate it very much. And if you haven't seen, he's put out some really cool videos. He did a video with Macaulay Culkin where they play a bunch of Home Alone NES and Genesis video games, which is pretty great. I look forward to his next movie. He's made several dozens of horror shorts, but he's going to be working on a horror feature, which should be pretty awesome. Definitely look forward to that. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Tom Seymour. Next show, hopefully, will be a full show, and we'll have James Richardson. And we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.